Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you may be. Thank you very much for joining us for this Waymaker webinar, The Great Undoing of Job Positions, Careers, and Life, and probably so much more. Michael Moon today is going to go ahead and explain what he means by the Great Undoing and try to make some sense out of what's been going on in the world. And of course, what we've been doing is creating a path for people to really transform their careers, whether as part of a digital job transformation, a career pivot, or as our dear friend Alex says, the decision to remain as a freelancer because the world is telling us that we need to do that. Whatever it is, it's time to seize control of your own life and actually build the epic life that you've been yearning for. So Michael, how would you like to start? You want to just give a little bit of background on the broader Waymaker concepts and then let's get into this?
Sure. Let's see here. Okay, so Waymakers is right now it's a conversation. It's not a program, it's not an offering, it's more of a conversation. And Waymakers is really about standing in the present and really thinking and really standing in a possibility unburdened by the past. And inspired by our best future, perhaps a best future that is yet still unfolding. Today's session, webinar, is going to run about 40 minutes, 45 minutes. If you have to bug out sooner than that, that's great. We want to make you one promise. We did the work. We want to share it, and we promise not to waste your time. Kind of our rough timeline is kind of the 3 acts of modern life, kind of undoing, how do you stop making sense, and then what are some of the critical steps of an epic life. So one of the things I really want to bring forward as kind of a backdrop of this is that in modern and kind of modern societies, we tend to live life in 3 basic acts. Kind of the first 30, 35 years of life is about discovering, who am I? Where do I belong? What brings me joy, happiness, and pleasure? Perhaps one of the most important things about this particular stage of life is sampling, going out and doing a lot of different things. And perhaps one of the most critical parts of this is deciding where you belong. And in fact, probably one of the most significant indicators of your life trajectory are the peer groups that you in which you defined yourself early on. Then the first undoing is right around 32, 35 years of age. I'll explain that in the next slide. But that's where we kind of really reassess and pivot away from kind of what my parents and family and friends say that I should do, and really start to say, this is really what I want to do. And so there's going to be a period, oftentimes 2, 3, 4, 5 years, in which kind of everything's upside down or sideways, and I'm not really quite sure what I'm doing, which I'm characterizing as an undoing. Then the next 30 years or so is about making your investments in your career. What shall I master? What can I parlay into more? How far can I take this? And this is really about developing a career, becoming a professional, earning and keeping trust, being reliable. And then as we kind of get into our 60s, 60, 65, we go through another reevaluation, another undoing, in which we ask ourselves, what got me here? What lessons can I share? What contribution can I make? What would be a boon to others? Now, another feature, and then that goes all the way out till our death. One of the features of our modern life is that increasingly there's a 4th option, in which we kind of go, it's too painful living a life that is bereft of meaning. It's too painful not knowing what it is that really makes a difference for myself and others. And this begins another, what I'll call epic undoing, which I'm going to characterize here in terms of the rubric for the day. I ain't working on Maggie's cubicle farm no more. I'm going to pivot to an epic life. And so this is really the work of personal transformation and a reawakening at any stage. And the central premise of Waymakers and career pivots is that we have a singular gift to share. And we'll get into what that is in a moment. But fundamentally, this age of reawakening, this personal transformation is really around identifying what is my singular gift to share? How does that transform the lives of those who receive it? How does it call me into inspired action? And in the course of that, what must I drop, minimize, or surrender? So as I said before, Waymakers is a stand in a possibility, unburdened by the past and hold forth and inspired by the mysteries of being human. Before I go on, any questions on this so far? Pretty straightforward? Good. So I want to really call attention to a central conflict that drives us, drives advancing action in life. Now, this is also the central mechanism of most entertainment, which is the conflict between I want something very, very much, but I struggle a lot to get it, versus I actually need X, but I forgot to generate it for myself and others. So when we start talking, so this is really about discovering what it is that I forgot, and more specifically, what I forgot to generate for myself. So the work of personal transformation is one of recognition and remembering what it is that you forgot, and specifically becoming conscious, deliberate, and persistent in generating that what I need. Now we could spend the rest of this morning unpacking this one concept, but I want to call attention to the fact is that we have a conflict, and whether in ourselves or in the world, and almost always is a conflict between what I think I want and what I actually need. So we'll unpack that. We'll continue to unpack that. Now, one of the things I've done dozens and dozens of career audits. And this is a pattern that I've noticed that comes through a career audit. Now, one of the things that we do in a career audit is saying, let's timeline your life and let's look at the major engagements, jobs, positions that you've had. And in the course of this, I ask, about that particular job, what did you hate? What did you really just kind of like, oh my God, that really sucks? Now, in the course of doing that, three things happen. One is there are tremendous gifts of energy that we received, but we never unpacked. And we package them as regrets and resentments. So as we pierce into the regrets and resentments of our past, we discover a couple things. That oftentimes they were moments in time when I regressed into a sense of lower agency. So this particular diagram describes the evolution of agency, of being conscious, deliberate, and persistent about handling intent and making your way in the world. So oftentimes we start off in life just as a me. Stuff happens to me. And then over the course of that stuff happening to me, generally I get a little mad. I get a little more focused. And I start to say, I want this, I want that. And we start to organize our world. We start to organize how we listen and make sense of the world in terms of an I. I get stuff done. And oh, by the way, get the hell out of my way. And there are some careers, some career paths, some career areas where a really strong ego or a really strong I is very powerful. And you can go a really long way. There are other areas where it's more collaborative, where, hey, a really strong ego basically gets you kicked off the team or out of the club. So then oftentimes we move on to a we. So in teamwork, I get more goodies and feel better. So the reason I'm in a team is about what I want to get. But I understand that now there's a trade-off, a transaction, which is to say, in order to get the goodies that I want, I must I must submit to the team. Now, on a team, there might be people that I really like, but there might be people that I really don't like. But that's fine. So long as we score points and win the game, that's great. By the way, that describes most of what management is in today's environment. Putting up with people, just tolerating people, but I'm tolerating that out of what I'm getting out of this. And so long as what I'm getting out of this is net more than it costs me psychically or personally or emotionally, I'm good with that. Then we cross over into the category of what I'll call us. Us is if you will, it's a condition of being, it's a state of mind, it's a way of being, where basically it is through others' emergence I discover who I am. By the way, this is the classic conflict between a leader, an entrepreneur, and a manager. A manager tends to focus on solving problems, getting things done as a team. Whereas a leader, an innovator, is really about creating a context, creating a space for others to flourish. And by the way, in that kind of that us context, there aren't mistakes. There are simply choices with consequences and the opportunity to make better choices in the future. So operating from an us is really about being, if you will, being a great parent. A great parent. So when your 1-year-old or 2-year-olds learning to walk and they fall down, we don't shout at them, "Hey, get up, dummy." We go, "Hey, you're learning about gravity. Cool. Oh, by the way, stay away from that table over there. You might hit your head." And then finally, there's the fifth domain, and I'm just going to characterize this as unity, and where I recognize the I am, it is, as indivisible and eternal. Now, sometimes we call that a peak experience. Sometimes we talk about that a moment of Zen. I'm just going to leave it out there as a transcendental state or a transcendent state of recognizing this is who you are in the grand scheme of things, and that I have a sense of purpose, and that there is an inherent joy, happiness, and pleasure in being alive. So over the course of this, over the course of career audits, I have discovered that this is essentially the trajectory of a good career. And that we oftentimes move into a space of higher agency and then revert. So there's a reversion back and forth until we stabilize, until we establish a new role, a new way of engaging, a new way of expressing who it is that we are. By the way, this back and forth is oftentimes some of the mechanisms of an undoing. So I'm going to pop out of this for a moment, Chris, and go to my board, my whiteboard, because there's something I want to diagram that illustrates this. Over time, my career kind of looked like this.
Michael, you went a little fuzzy again on your camera, unfortunately.
My career kind of looked like this. Kind of looks like a stock chart. And one of the things I discovered on my 65th birthday was, one, I had failed at life. The things that I set out to achieve when I was a young man, I systematically failed at. I had a number of really great successes, but fundamentally, the things I said I wanted to do, I didn't do. And when I looked at this, I saw that there were these various peaks. There was this peaks when, for example, early in one of the peaks was my partner and I did a paper, a research study on interactive multimedia. Apple adopted it. This one thing led into another, and all of a sudden Apple's sending me around the world. IBM is sending me around the world talking about digital brands and digital media and how they would be transformational. And one of the things I discovered was that when I got to this particular peak, I failed to parlay it into the next big thing. In fact, what I did is I simply went, and there were I got calls from all around the world to come do this or that, and I just said, eh. And then I fell into these pits. And I felt, and upon reflecting, upon recapitulation of my life, I discovered that there were things that I just simply said, no. And when I looked at this, I discovered a couple things. My greatest achievements in life, when I framed them as my achievements, were empty and hollow. However, when I started to really look at that and say, well, what was so meaningful about it? It was the partnerships that I had and what those partnerships pulled through me, and the deeper recognition of there are things for me to give that I have forgotten to give, and somehow in this situation they've reminded me to bring it forward. And as I fell into these pits, one of the things I discovered is it supercharged the climb out. And I discovered that part of an epic life is to literally fall into a pit, and the joy is figuring how to climb out of it. So this fall from an accomplishment to a pit, to the bottom of the valley, is what I'll characterize as a great undoing. Okay, cool. So let me go on. Let me share my screen again. Where's my thing?
The curse of the tabs.
Curse of the tabs is right. Find Chrome. Am I broadcasting?
You are again. Just hit the present button and you're good.
Am I good?
Yeah, just hit the present button on the right.
I am presenting. Am I in a present?
Yes, we're good now again.
Okay, so in an undoing, what's undone? And so this particular model is one that I really want to bring forward as the most concise representation of what it means to be human in terms of and what it means to be alive. So I characterize this, first of all, I'm saying that in life we have ideals. We have relationships, we have action, and we have a sense of being, narrative. And in the course of this, we learn lessons, we have conflicts, and we have feedback. And the three guiding principles for how we kind of stay true is a sense of integrity, impeccability, and abiding love. And I suggest that part of the undoing is that our ideals change. What it is that I want changes. And as a function of that, our lessons change, our conflicts change, and our feedback changes. So in the course of this, what's being undone is literally my story in terms of who I am. Great. Welcome aboard, Mr. Gilbert. Okay. So in this particular graphic, I want to convey a couple things. As a general aim, we all seek more. When I talk about what it is that we need, we seek more joy, more happiness, and more pleasure. And then the business equivalence of that is growing profits, customer success, and a greater workplace. And right in the center of this, I'm suggesting that we have a current state, how we are in the moment, right? And when we make a goal, we make an agreement to expand to include new variables. Specifically, making goals are an agreement with the world to feel annoyed and frustrated until you get X. 2, accomplishing a goal stabilizes a new expanded operating state that's characterized by this little thing in the middle. And I'm suggesting that part of stabilizing a new desired state is about making small progress, daily or weekly process, and it's really about establishing social norms. So I'm going to drop out of this again and go back to my board here. I'm suggesting that in terms of going, our process from going from where I am now to where I want to be, it's a flow between putting things in place, systems and actions, and ways of relating, ways of communicating, ways of being. And it's out of this that as I begin to move forward towards my goal, I'm stabilizing a new way of being. And oftentimes the most important part that we struggle with is not kind of what I want, what it looks like, but it is altering how I relate to others. It's the communications, the relationships, it's the interactions. And that's ultimately when I learned that in terms of achieving a goal, really what I'm talking about is a new way of relating with others in the world. Okay, let's go back here. Come on. Okay. So, the key point that I wanted to make here is that as we move through life in terms of discovering what it is that we want to bring into the world, the real work of that is what I call the daily attunement practices and micro-progressions. So we'll get into what those are in a moment, but fundamentally it's about establishing small, meaningful progress day in and day out while establishing new social norms. So what are some examples? So the model to the right describes, if you will, kind of how it is that we translate ideas into and thoughts and impressions into realities. And so in this particular progression model, we go from I'm paying attention to something. Now I've got an intention where I'm not. And it goes through three basic states: mental, emotional, and physical, or action. And as we do this, we kind of move from one level from intention to realization. And so part of the job of realizing things is really having a vision in terms of what it looks like. I'll explain what those are in a minute, what some hacks that we can do there. Enthusiasm, what's my next thrilled anticipation? And embodiment. And embodiment is really having it, the experience of having that new operating state or goal fully realized, even though it's still kind of on the way. So daily attunements. What are some examples of some daily attunements? Mindfulness, meditation, naps, breath work. Nutrition, obviously. Movement, walks, yoga, stretching. Gratitude, morning and evening journals. Happy money. Daily inspection of accounts and transactions with intentional thank yous. And abiding love. Conscious and deliberate love language, actions, and expressions. So for example, one of my expressions of abiding love is that my wife gets up early in the morning. She almost always cooks some oatmeal and leaves a dirty pan in the sink, which I've taken on as an expression of I love you when I clean it every morning. So when I'm cleaning her oatmeal pot every morning, I literally say to myself, and I love you. So that's an example of abiding love. It's doing something that you might not normally want to do, but doing it in the spirit of love. Okay, so I want to start summarizing here on the 11 steps of a career transformation, or the 13 steps. I'm suggesting that as we shift into an epic life, as we start to look for a career transformation, it starts with, first of all, a commitment. I'm just gonna. It starts with a current position. So it starts with an assessment of where I am in life. How does the world show up? And then in that, a deeper retrospective. What happened? What's my story about what happened? And what's the deep down truth? So, for example, when I was doing my introspection on my 65th, around my 65th birthday, I really came to conclude that I've lived two lives. There's the life that I lived moving forward in pursuit of my goals, and then there was a second life that I actually lived, which was an uncovering, a bringing forward something that I would now call what I would call a gift, something that makes a difference. And so part of the retrospective is then unpacking the gifts, by which to really understand what are my values in action, what's my skill, what's in my skill stack, what are my ways of working, what are my best working environments and situations. This gets down to this next slash of daily practices, getting things done, and accountabilities. And that really requires having a systems in place by which you really manage your commitment and energy. And then from that, it's about then really building up from that. Well, what combination of skills, narrative anxieties, and frame my superpowers? So let me give you an example of something from my career stack. One of the things that I, when I first started off in my kind of professional life, I was an introvert. I couldn't write worth crap. I was a horrible public speaker. And one of the things that I just really, really avoided, like death, was any kind of emotional disclosures of what's really important to me. And over the course of my career, I learned to speak, to be public speaking. I learned in the course of learning to be a public speaker was to love the bomb, to love being an ass on stage, and having no resistance about looking foolish. The thing that I just really hate, and yet it's what's required of me, is to say, I'm here, I'm doing my best. This isn't perfect. I really want it to be perfect. I struggle with it. I wish it were better, and I'm here. I'm doing my best. My best in my estimate is not good enough, but that's just an internal story about why not to. I'm here. So that's an example of really getting into your singular gift. And oftentimes I have found, not oftentimes, the bad news that I have found is the very thing that I'm anxious about is the thing that I have to contribute. I'll say that again. The singular gift that I have to give is something that is almost always something that's not baked, that's not perfect. It's something about which I still feel anxious, and it's bringing it forward anyway. So now I want to talk a little bit about future proofs as a way to kind of start wrapping up our conversation. One of the things that I do almost every day in my morning journal is I do a set of future proofs. And so, for example, I would say, as I'm writing this out, okay, it is now July 28th, 2024. So, from the perspective of July 28th, 2024, I recall that over the last 3 years, I had undergone a personal transformation. I recall that I had really made it. I recall that as I begin to share what I could in the world, I really found my voice. I recall that in finding my voice, I was able to make a difference in ways that I could only hope to in the past, but now I was doing that on a day-to-day basis. It's just normal, so I'm now shifting. It's just normal that I show up in an open and vulnerable and accessible way. It's just normal that I share my anxieties as they occur. It's just normal that I take strength in sharing my anxieties as they occur. It's just normal that things come to me and I say them, and I don't censor them as I did in the past. It's just normal that I show up. That's an example of future proofing. So an example of future proofing is stepping into a future that worked out and recalling, if you will, what happened over the intervening years. And in the course of doing this, this begins to train your reactive mind that not only did it turn out, but there is a way of being. There's now a standard, a normative way of being that is now expected of me. So it's a way of really kind of hacking, if you will, your reactive mind into accepting, into expanding to include new variables. At this point, I'm going to kind of come back to start wrapping up our thing, because I think we're on our 45-minute. Chris, I think we're at the point where we're beginning to wrap up. Maybe we can have some questions and go from there.
Excellent. We have a bunch in the chat. Matt, do you want to speak to it? Do you want to come back?
Back to it. We'll come back to it. Let's let Michael finish the arc here and we can come back.
So in our next steps, I suggest that you read an interview called at LinkedIn. We'll send you a deck of this called The Neuroscience of Changemakers. We have a shared drive with a whole bunch of things for you to access and read and look at. If you'd like to schedule a private session, that's great. And if you're in an HR function, we'd love to design a custom program for you and your team. That might include doing some on-site briefings, a company meeting, or even a talent ecosystem survey. Okay.
Right. If there's nobody else, Mike, let me get into something that's actually, well, we know each other well now, and many of you know me as well. But man, I got to tell you, this feels like a lot again. I think one of the biggest challenges, even when I approach creating a new morning set of rituals for me is, and Matt speaking to it, and this is what actually made me bring this part up. It just feels overwhelming, so much to do. And I guess that's kind of the overwhelm that I get from life that makes me sometimes want to avoid it. So what is this sort of thing to do to find comfort in that anxiety and that sort of, wow, there's a lot going on here that is more than just do the next thing? Because working with my shrink, that's kind of the mantra we came up. When you get to that point, what's the next action? Focus on that and only that. Is that the same here, or is there any other advice you can give to me and people like me who feel overwhelmed looking at this?
Right. So, first of all, thank you for sharing that, because I think that is that characterize that. Certainly, I felt that. I think many people feel like, they'll read Getting Things Done, or whatever, Tools of Titans, and they go, oh my God, how could I ever do that? So, first of all, that sense of overwhelm and anxiety exists for the purpose of keeping you small.
Funny, another parallel track I've experienced in life.
Right. Now, there was a point in time when just hunkering down, pulling in, being small was a good survival strategy. But I think it's important to start with the recognition that anxiety, fear, dread are signals that you're in the middle of an undoing. Two, you can always shut it down, but it'll always come back. Three, yes, it's true that there's only to do only one. You can only do one thing. And then four, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Just do something that makes yourself feel a little better. Now, in some cases, for me, one of the most important pivotal things that I did for me was meditating twice a day for at least 30 minutes apiece. Just chill. Just get into that zone. And that started to ripple throughout the rest of my day. Now, this all starts from I'm just gonna become more conscious, deliberate, and persistent in handling intent of moving forward in life towards things that are meaningful, not because they're intrinsically meaningful, but because they're meaningful for me. Now, this 11-step path that I outlined, I wanted just to convey that there is a roadmap, right? And that there are things ahead. But to think about the things ahead without kind of really dealing with where you are right now is counterproductive, which is a reason not to engage. In my opinion. Yes, Matt. The habit of being still. Any other questions here?
Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. You don't need to necessarily raise your hand right now. Or if none, I can go into a lot of others. Matt, please.
I'm fascinated. By the way, Michael, this is extremely helpful and extremely interesting and lights up a lot of things in me. All good, all good. I'm extremely interested from a conceptual standpoint in whether that the 11-stop journey there that we saw at the end, how that sort of fits, or if it does, into any of those other diagrams, the triangle, or that one that had sort of life stages or discovery stages. I'm really fascinated as to whether there's a notion of how those integrate or not. Maybe they don't, which is okay, or maybe they do, which might make it easier for people like me to sort of bucketize those, right? That either they exist in smaller sets, clumped together, or maybe there's a whole cycle in each one. Maybe it's more complicated. I'm not sure, but I'm just my curiosity is really piqued about that, because I think we all have different clock speeds in terms of learning and developing. And I think those clock speeds can change either with sort of Satori or Kensho, right? Something like that, or we meet somebody who lights us up and unlocks some things, either events or people or circumstance.
Right. I think we're kind of mixing three different things here. So one is there's a basic pattern of life in three acts with the option of going, you know, I'm not going to work on Maggie's farm no more. And as you come to that recognition, there is an undoing. There is, and literally you stop making sense in the way that you used to, and you start making sense in a new way. And the new way oftentimes is in fits and starts. It's like, I don't know, but it's like whatever got me here is not going to get to me where I need to go. So that was job one, was to say we generally progress across these three acts, and at some point we go, nope, and I'm gonna pivot to an epic life, and when I do that, the shitstorm's gonna move in, and I'm gonna start to get very confused. The purpose of that molecule, that tetrahedron, was to say that when you change your ideals, when you change how you define your success or your joy, happiness, and pleasure, it changes what you're learning. It changes the relationships that you have. It changes the conflicts both within and out. So that was really just to kind of bring forward, to bring to clarity that sense making, how we make sense, is a function of those 4 or 5 dynamics, those four dimensions, and that one of the things that is true, that persists over time, is your sense of integrity, your sense of impeccability, and your sense of abiding love. Those are the, if you will, your guiding stars. Those are the transcendentals by which you navigate the whirlwind of life. So that was the point of that. And so as you are in the middle of an undoing, literally your sense making breaks down, and your sense of being is under stress. In fact, it's in a tremendous conflict, and there's a tearing apart and a reassembling, or a reintegration. Okay. The next piece was this notion of over time, my agency grows from being a victim, a me, to being a villain or a hero in terms of an I, to being a member on a team, and ultimately crossing over into that dimension of us, which is, oh, I'm really a space in which Michael or Matt occur. I am a space in which we occur, and I am defining not in terms of what I want, but I'm defining my success in terms of what emerges, what shows up. And that represents oftentimes the height of maturity for most people. I'm just saying that's about as good as it gets. And I'm just saying, and there's a fifth stage beyond that, which is more of what I'll call unity consciousness. I am, it is, as one thing. Now, Stephen, before I go on to the next, Stephen, you and I had just started to have a conversation around the notion of being more than just an individual, more than just being an ego or an I. Did you want to build upon that conversation a bit here?
Yeah, well, there's something that you said about your career and the graph and the high point at one point where you were kind of on top of your game and you could have parlayed it to the next level. it sounds like you were on the cutting edge of what still is very much an early adaptive phase in what is a huge potential. And I'm just wondering how, thinking back, when was that, how long ago, and how much from that you wanted to bring forward into Waymakers and your new current vision, and obviously how we could support that.
So what was the last question?
How we can support you in that vision.
Well, I think this is what support looks like. Showing up and having a conversation.
Yeah, that's a start.
It's a start. Well, let me throw it back at you. What what would you suggest as an option?
Well, you know, there are so many different possible ways to move a project forward. And the thing is maybe to look at what would be the most maximal way to introduce the biggest possibility for change and transformation for the most people. So, you know, start with the big picture, big vision. And I would start with thinking about how learning and education within companies and industries need to be totally transformed, because I think basically the formula within companies is incremental change. I think they need to become exponentially oriented, seeing that they are all capable of exponential change, and then to find the learning and tools and skills to support that, which usually I think introduce the concept digitalize the physical, and that would be the way of learning how to deal with the data they've already got, but which is not collected into any typically useful data sets that can be used to catapult, and to somehow do this in some way that there's a collaborative effort among those forward-looking thinkers within organizations, and some way to invite them to participate in that dialogue.
Cool, thanks. Um,
Just forgive me for a minute because I have to do something, and it'll take me a sec.
sure.
Hey,
Right here.
Michael. First of all, I get JS in the queue to ask a question, but just closing up on that to make a more precise request. One of the things, and Stephen actually hinted at this, is actually how to reach more people and get out there. And one of the ways we're looking to do that is by getting speaking engagements set up for Michael to talk about this work, to talk about specific issues within that work. You know, we're looking at stuff for associations and possibly public, get us in front of large audiences, and looking for more private conversations that might lead to some gigs. So that would be a wonderful way to support us if you know of an organization or you work with an association, or if you have friends at a given company who are considering how to really restart this and change the relationship that they have with talent and their approach. We'd love to have some of those intros. So please share the work and some of the videos on YouTube and some of the other stuff, and help us to expand the audience that gets to see this, because that is our biggest challenge right now. Thank you for that. JS, please get yourself off mute. Let's get your iPad running again.
Yes, I'm glad I was able to get in today. If anybody was watching earlier, a little technological problem. I only have like $1 billion worth of gear here, but it happens sometimes. So I went to a redundancy of a redundancy. But anyway, so, and thank you so much, Michael. I've really appreciated not just what you've said the last few weeks, but also the fact that it has prompted me to set aside a lot of time each day, actually delving into it in my own way and trying to have it work for me. So there are a couple of things. One, the whole thing about getting what you need. I think that internally, a lot of us who have, let's just say, things are okay, or they're good, or maybe even very good. Usually when you get those new things, they represent all kinds of change. And I think when things are really rotten and lousy and bad, it's okay to embrace or really, desperately try and find those things that you need. But when things are going good, it's much harder to try and convince other people or yourself to get those things that you need, because things can be better. And this is a reason why a lot of women, for example, stay in battered relationships. They know that they can get through it, although it's awful, but they're afraid of that unknown that comes when they get what they need. So that's one thing. And the other thing that I was hoping maybe you could talk a little about is my way of dealing with the falling down. I wouldn't say my peaks and valleys have been maybe as like yours, but very much so. I've gotten broke about several times in my life and rebuilt that up, and doing okay. But what I have found is on the falling down process, and actually in every aspect of life, but especially there, being of service is what brings me back up. And I think maybe sometimes it manifests as an ego thing. You've fallen down a little bit, so suddenly you want to be of service to kind of bolster yourself up in your mind. But then you get to that point where it's just an innate desire and want. And I would say that in my life, part of my success has been able to make other people successful. Part of the wealth that my wealth program has been making other people wealthy. So I'm curious what you have to say about those two things, if that's okay.
Sure. So, by the way, thank you, and yeah, thank you. I like your term in terms of the falling, kind of a falling down, and and I also like to characterize it as oftentimes in order to move to the next level, you have to let go of what kept you there, and so it may well be that it's not a falling down, but it's a letting go of the safety blanket. It's letting go of what got you there and keeps you there. Now, again, I'm also mindful of the fact that in the moment it's going, no. So there's that. I do want to say something about kind of when you're in the thick of it, or like it's just like in your face, and you feel like, oh my God, I'm never going to get out of this, or this really sucks, or whatever. So much of what we do is we deal with problems, and oftentimes we deal with problems initially by pushing them away, ignoring them, tolerating them until they get so bad that we do something about it. That's kind of the learned response. I have found the counterintuitive thing to do is, so say for example, let's say I'm really anxious about, oh my God, I'm running out of money. Just using that as an example. Oh my God, I'm running out of money. So what I'll do is I'll actually go to my chair where I meditate or snooze-a-tate, and I'll say, okay, for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to exacerbate, I'm going to make worse the feeling of panic and dread about not having enough money. So instead of going away from it, I'm actually going to go into it. Now, in the course of going into it, something changes. something alters and my relationship with it begins to morph a little bit. And I do so with the idea of this is just a temporary state, and my job is to allow it to move through my body with ease and gratitude. So oftentimes the best way of dealing with these powerful negative states of anxiety, dread, or so on is to actually feel them. And for bonus points, you could say, and thank you. Thank you for having gotten me here. Thank you for protecting, looking out for my interests. And I got it. We don't need to. It's like, thank you for your service, but I'll take it from here. So the job, if you will, is really shifting from I need to do something to being the space, to shifting to being that space. I call it that us space, but really being the space in which what needs to move through your body moves through your body. And oftentimes just getting back into the flow of, okay, and really beginning to accept that there is a larger design. There's a plan afoot, and I'm not quite sure what it is yet, but it's coming my way. So I will now expand to include it. And that's a maneuver that I have found works again and again and again. So to your point around falling down, I think it is really a breaking open. A breaking open and a letting go. And that the falling down, to use your metaphor, was where I was really trying to restrict or hold back the flow of life, as opposed to really expanding to include it. Does that kind of speak to it, JS?
Yeah, that talked to a big part of it. I don't know. I'm getting from a lot of what you say that it seems as though if you cut right through the thick of things, really what we have to worry about is our thinking, and that's what it is.
And it is the one thing we have absolute control over.
Yeah.
Let me speak to that a little bit more, though, and then go ahead, Michael. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to do one thing on that. Thinking is a part of it, and certainly it's been my proclivity, but I really want to reframe that as it's really about attunement. So one of the things I do in my morning meditation is that I'll say to myself, may it be that in this deep meditation, I blend with my highest enthusiasm for the day, and may it be that it flows within and throughout I am, it is, with pleasure, gratitude, and satisfaction. So it's my sense that my sense that there's a thinking part, there's a feeling part, and there's a sensing part, but they're all part of the same. They're all facets of what I'll call my attunement. So let me say this a little more succinctly. I believe that being conscious and deliberate about your attunement is the work of the moment. It's about being attuned with the possibilities that are really beginning to emerge through my highest enthusiasm. And I've got all kinds of history and all sorts of freight that's going to argue for me to go into being angry or annoyed or frustrated or sad or whatever. But that's just an example of kind of a bleed through, and that's ultimately kind of what I'm now becoming more conscious and deliberate about.
Is that a little bit like a power versus force kind of thing?
Absolutely. Or flow versus force. Absolutely. Chris, did you want to say something?
Yeah. First of all, well, just a quick heads up. Esteban has a idea to share with you and some questions. Joining us from Facebook Live, jumped over here to Zoom. But before I get to that, I want to speak to actually the pattern that I see from myself and also from JS perspective, that a lot of people in the world would sense or would listen to the presentation that you just gave and see the falling down as well. I think that is, as we talk about the background here, that is the background that most people look at the world through that lens, right? Or look through the lens to see that sort of background. And that is the common sort of belief on this. Not that it's the undoing, not that it's the opening up of a greater potential, or to Matt's sharing of Jerry Coloma's work, broke open heart, strong back, and how to do this sort of stuff. And that, I guess this is part of the thing. I hate getting into it, but I still see it as that there are so few people ready for this, and so few people who have the current capacity. Now, that said, they have the ability to eventually, but they are limited themselves by how they view the world, by the framing they have, and by their current thoughts and the way they judge things, which is, I'm trying to accomplish this thing. I didn't accomplish it. Fuck me. and that feeling of that, and that's an easy way to synthesize that feeling and all those things together to simplify my experience and to put it into perspective. And it is the advantage perspective of this work that I think is a differentiator. But for those people out there who do have this more traditional common view, what do you think it's going to take for people to be able to open up to this new sort of framing and view, to see it as an undoing, not as a fall?
I think it's a combination of two things. And so I'll start with the primary driver. When people answer the question, at what point am I going to say this is enough and that I deserve better? Or another way of saying that is, how is it that my current state has become more dangerous and perilous than making a needed improvement? So pain drives most people to do the thing. The alternative is, you guys seem to be having a lot more fun than I am. What are you drinking? What are you smoking? What are you up to? So the combination of, oh, I'm just having a shit of a time, to, oh my God, you're having a lot more fun than I am. I think I'll try what you're doing. I think it's a combination of those two things. Yeah,
I know what it is.
Esteban, turn your mic on, Esteban. Welcome.
Hi. I don't know why I happened to be here. It just happened to be here. Just wanted to compliment what you said about the two parts. I learned when I was studying that there's three motivators. One is avoid the punishment. One is seek the reward. And the third motivator, which is stronger than any of the two, is a personal conviction, or a being committed to the project or whatever. When I learned this, I created a triangle diagram very similar to the one you have, and I put this three on the three corners, or the three apexes. My diagram was rotated so that instead of having two like this, you would have it like this, and you would have the negative on the bottom, the benefits on the center, and the commitments on the top. When you do that, when you're fully committed, it doesn't matter the threat or the rewards. You just simply flow or do whatever is up there. So I just wanted to share
That's great.
Since well, that's it.
No, that's great, and I agree with everything you're saying. So yes. One last thing though about the commitment is that, and it has the difference between what I really want, my versus what I'm called to do. And so I guess I would double click on your term commitment. That when you stop making sense, when you just stop, when you just get quiet, when you just go, okay, I'm not going to get out of bed until there's something worth getting out of bed for, really. Which was this undoing that I had when I was 30 years old. At some point, you are called. Sometimes it's only just an impulse. It's a sense, it's a curiosity. And that curiosity, when stoked, becomes an interest, an engagement, till finally becomes an all-consuming passion. So I guess what I'm saying is that with respect to commitments, there's two kinds of commitments. There's commitments that you make, and there are commitments that make you.
Mm.
And that's the one that I'm really speaking to. The second one is exposing yourself to the commitments that own you, that make you, that transform you, and they are the damn thing about it is we got the only choice that we have is to abide in love or not for it. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I mean, one of the things that I've been working on for a long time is a shift from, I call it a belief language, but it's basically, it's sort of like shifting from Cartesian to polar to another kind of setup. But basically is I see that there are positive, neutral, and negative terminology. And depending on how we use these, it projects different things.
Yeah.
And what I hear you say was a little bit the difference between my truth and the truth, or my subjective perception of what's going to make me happy or fulfilled versus what will actually make me happy and fulfilled, which sometimes isn't something we know prior to realizing it.
That's right.
So sometimes one has to try certain things and then realize from what one does, or
Yeah.
what should one do. I guess one of the things that I'm wondering, which I always kind of face, is I have this ideology that is based on positive thinking, but it's a little bit more than just positive thinking. It's more of a realistic thinking. When I say realistic thinking is you have the pessimist, which is always negative. You have the positivist, which is always positive. But then both of them are kind of like a goof, because one is arguing about the glass being half full. The other one is arguing about the glass being half empty. While the realist will see the glass, will see it's full, it's half water, half air, and some other stuff in there. So I'm trying to share this triad way of seeing things, but a lot of people are still fixated on the duality, and sometimes not even the duality, but the negativity of the duality, or
Sure.
the opposites. And okay, My question was, how do you deal with people that are thinking in that other mode to get them to think in this new mode?
Besides it, yeah,
So, so first,
I
so,
won't say it.
so first of all, kind of the general rule of thumb is that when you find yourself in a ditch, you stop digging. Two, I don't deal with people. Uh, uh, and so that's the equivalent of stop digging the ditch. I don't resist or push against, or I do my best to abide in love for them. And God, that'd be a whole other hour if we just got into that. But and there's one thing I do really want to bring back that speaks to what you were talking about, and Stephen, if you can expand upon this, that would be great. So, our world, kind of, if you ask, well, how is it that you see the world? I see the world in terms of my subjective eye, and then there's this objective world out here. And there's this split between my subjective, my private world, subjective experience, and the objective world out there, right? And we could say, yeah, in a philosophy we can call naive realism. This is all about scientific truth, rationality, the way the world works. Yeah. And then you've got your own subjective world, imagination, interpretation. But at the end of the day, those are two separate worlds. Good so far? I mean, that's kind of how I would describe today. So I'm suggesting, and this split, and now sometimes you could put this in history and call this the Cartesian mind-body split. It is the subjective objective truth equation. A lot of different ways of describing that. However, as I want to bring forward an idea, a distinction that's not new, but it's generally one that we've forgotten. And I'm suggesting that there is an I am, there is a it is, and then there's the space in which I am, it is shows up. So that is to say, the I am is, oh, that's Michael Moon with this history, this bag of skin, blah, 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 that's been through these experiences. And there's how the world is, how the world shows up. But I'm really saying that I'm now I'm really calling attention to the space in which that occurs. And to the extent, and this is part of what being mindful is. Part of being mindful and conscious is disassociating from or over-indexing or over-identifying with my subjective experience and just being the field of awareness in which life shows up. Make sense? Great. So I'm suggesting that this perspective is an advantaged perspective, and it is one of the cornerstones of waymaking, and when you stand in this perspective of life moves through my body, right? And I am the space in which thoughts and emotions occur. As we persist in that, at some point, life will knock on your door and go, hey, I got something for you. And it will be one of those, that'll be that calling. And then ultimately it becomes that super, in your language, Esteban, it becomes that super commitment. It becomes that truth that uses you. That gift that as you bring it into the world transforms you and your ability to bring it into the world.
May I?
Please.
It seems to me that the largest part of the world, most people, most companies, most governments,
Sure.
are not going about things, for lack of a better word, right. For example, the immense amounts of efforts that are being put out to try and eliminate bias, as opposed to understanding that bias is a part of our fabric and learning how to best live with it. Or the concept that we must make things fair, when fair, that it doesn't exist.
Right.
If it's raining and the rain is providing nourishment to a crop for a farmer and it's a wonderful thing, but a mile down the road, his neighbor is being flooded out of his house, then is the rain a good thing or a bad thing? Or is it just friggin' rain? And I think this is the problem that we have. We want to put everything in a box. We want to have everything working in harmony, and so we get books with how to live life in balance, as opposed to a book that says nothing is ever going to fucking be in balance. Figure it out and learn how to live with it. And that's what it seems to me. And frustration for me comes from trying to teach pigs to fly, or because it all it does is it pisses you off and also pisses off the pig. And there are just a lot of people out there. Do they have the ability in deep inside to try and transcend? And yeah, but do they bother? No. And quite honestly, on any given day, I don't bother either. So, there you have it. And I know better.
Yeah.
So I'd like to follow on that, if I might.
Please.
I think that your first dichotomy is what's called these days correlationism. That means that we have to think something for something to be what it is. So things only occur because we're correlated to them. Our subjectivity is correlated to the objectivity. However, actually, it really goes to the second level, because the it that is giving is not a correlated something. It is that open space that you've opened up, out of which then all the things flow. And so tuning to that is something different than being caught in this correlated way of thinking. Now, this I that you've put there really is also an I we, because the I is also always what groups we're in, what we's we identify. We're white male, we're black female. We have different then reference points that are going to separate us and give us different ways of thinking about various events. And there's not actually uniformity in these we's. They're in conflict. And even within these we's, there's lots of conflict as to who defines them. And some of them, they want to grow. Others, the central, intense core deciding group doesn't want to grow. It wants to only keep it very sort of small and elite and privileged. And so we're always in battle. We're always going to be conflictual. But your formula of transcendence, everybody has that opportunity to reframe, undo, and become again renewed, so that they can then know which inner circles and which we's are most productive and important for them to work with. I think, at least that's what I would say.
Cool. I love your term, correlationism. I'm officially declaring I'm going to steal that here. And I agree without qualification that the I here, in terms of this I am, this I here is indistinguishable and indivisible from the space in which it shows up. And so I wanted to really convey a sense of that us, or that that unity, and in that unity there are many. I made the point earlier that as we go through life, your choice of peer groups, the choice of tribes to which you make yourself a member, is probably one of the most consequential decisions that you make. Because membership comes not only with privileges, but it comes with duties, including shared values, shared ways of seeing the world, shared behaviors, and so on. So, looping back to what you were also saying, Esteban and JS, was really becoming mindful of what tribes I put myself in, and what tribes I subscribe to, as a way of adjusting, a way of getting a better handle on my attunements. There are certain groups where the agreement is life sucks. And so the question is, do I want to tune into that I am it is, so that I can get suckage moving through my system? And I'm saying, no, you have a choice about that. Yeah, Esteban.
Yeah, but what happens when you believe life is great, but some people are stuck with a sucky situation, and they're stuck in a sucky situation because their mentality is fixated on that ideology. And basically you say, well, you only have to switch and appreciate what you have instead of what you don't have, and then move from there. And they're always going to go back to what they don't have instead of what they do.
So first of all, their particular attunement, is not right or wrong. It's just their attunement. They are intrinsically and wholly who they are in that moment. And there's nothing wrong, good, bad. They're just being that way in the moment. Part of how they maintain that attunement is to poke you and to get you to argue with them. Part of how they maintain the world sucks is to pull you in as a hero, or as a villain, by which then to have an argument or a conflict with you. And to the extent that you argue with their attunement, you literally add more energy to its fixedness. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm being triggered by what you're saying right now.
Yeah.
Okay. And let me just put two ideas forward just to ease my triggerness. Okay. One of the things is I prefer to use the word dialogue to argument.
Sure.
Okay. And
yeah. Sure.
It's just one of the things.
Yeah, that's good.
The other thing is I do recognize that their way of seeing things is just their way of seeing things, but I also recognize that there are good and bad ways. So I may judge their way as their way, yeah, and as being wrong or being right, depending on if such a way is right or wrong.
Right.
Objectively, not because I think so or I feel so, but because of some objective criteria that has been established to be correct, for instance.
Well, that's again what I was poking at. There is no objective criteria. The only criteria is the criteria that you generate. And I'm saying now let's be a little more conscious and mindful about the criteria that you're generating, by which you then assess others and yourself.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
And I mean, because at the base, the criteria I use is what is right or correct or best, whichever way you want to say it. But it's objective. It's not so much subjective. And I know that this is going to trigger you into the other side.
It's not that it triggers me. I'm just saying, yes, I absolutely get how for some people, perhaps yourself, that this criteria is objective or transcendentally true or universally true and so on. And I get that. And I'm going to say, and in the argument, the dialogue that I'm advancing here is, and there's another way of relating to the world, and there's another way of relating to that particular person that gives you more choice, and that ultimately allows you to serve them more effectively. I'm just saying that by judging them, you add to their fixedness.
See, there's another way of thinking and languaging this, and that is that people have their constraints, and they're going to be different constraints, but you're not going to take people out of their constraints. What they need to do is they need to find their way out of their constraints if they want to.
Yep.
I think another aspect of this, if you dig really deep, is that our frustrations, our issues, our problems, this usually can be rooted back to wanting to disprove an absolute truth. We want to take an absolute truth and say, nope, it's not that way. It's a lie. And I think that a lot of, whether you call them dialogues, interactions, arguments, or whatever, has a lot to do with these levels of judgment that sometimes get heaped up in that. And then the truth gets lost in it. We don't understand the truth. We lose the value of the truth. All that kind of stuff that gets involved. I'm not a Buddhist, but I do believe a lot in the 4 basic Buddhist truths, and realize that for me personally, a lot of my frustration comes when I try to disprove them.
Right. Cool. So, Chris, I think we're about that point in time when we should probably start wrapping up here.
Yes. Well, once again, conversations are hard to stop. So we can continue them and let everyone operate with their own agency as they need to leave. So thank you, everyone, for staying with us for the extra time. This is obviously very personally fascinating and important conversation for me. And I appreciate all of you showing up today to share the time with us and to share your insights and personal experiences and help us get the better framing. As mentioned earlier at the top of the hour, one of the things that would be best to help us expand this work, if you know of people who might be interested in bringing us in to speak, to hear Michael's ideals around this career transformation, particularly with corporations who are thinking about being proactive with digital job transformation and embracing a lot of these principles in looking after the well-being of their talent more broadly, but also nonprofits, associations, and others. And of course, we'll be sharing with you after this event. I'll share a link with you tomorrow to the YouTube video of the core portions of the event. And if you could go ahead and share that out with your networks, that would be fantastic. As you may have noticed in the 11-step path that we've outlined so far, one of the key elements is fan basing. And that is actually leveraging our networks to talk to people themselves and to get that social share to help more people discover what the work is we're doing and help it to transform their lives. So we'd really appreciate any of that. And that's about it for today for Waymaker's webinar this Wednesday.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Micah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Take care.